But what happens is that this generates a shearing motion on the cribriform plate, and the olfactory nerve is severed. And if it's completely severed, it's lost.
Forever? Because my understanding is that the olfactory sensory neurons are among the few central nervous system neurons in adult humans that can regenerate. Or replenish themselves.
Right. Yeah. So I'll again, there are a few questions in one.
Yeah, that's okay.
So first of all,
we will spin many plates simultaneously.
If it's completely severed, then yes, you're lost.
Forever.
Yeah. If it's completely severed, because even if you'll have regeneration at the basal cell level at the epithelium, they won't manage to find their way back to the bulb. If you have partial or something left, or something shows up in a short while after the injury, then you have a good chance of recovery.
Because they grow along the trajectory of the other axons, or pioneering the way for them.
Assumingly, yeah.
Interesting.
And so basically, and basically the time frame, and it's funny, I get a lot of emails on this, although I'm not a medical doctor, but I get a lot of emails from people who have lost their sense of smell, because it's very distressing. And now more people know this because of COVID, that it's very distressing. And basically the rule of thumb is that if you don't get it back within a year to a year and a half, you'll never get it back.
My understanding of the statistics on olfactory loss in COVID and other viral type infections is that, first of all, I experienced that when I got COVID.
Including total anosmia?
For one day. And not total. It was just, there was a remnant of an ability to smell or perceive the smell of a lemon, and I was huffing as hard as I possibly could.
So,
I actually, there's an over-the-counter remedy, and this is not pseudoscience because there's a number of papers published about this on PubMed, that alpha-lipoic acid can accelerate the recovery of smell.
Yeah.
And so that's something that it worked successfully for me. I'm not saying that that's the only route.
You don't know if it worked successfully for you or if you would have recovered anyway. I mean, you didn't do a controlled
study.
True,
but I was not willing to do the control experiment. Exactly.
So yeah, let me say two things on this front. First, the data on the alpha-lipoic acid is
Yeah, it's not overwhelming.
Yeah,
but losing your sense of smell is overwhelming.
Yeah, no, I know.
So I think people feel desperate.
One word about smelling the lemon, and this is I'll take that opportunity to share more information. When we smell things, it's the result of more sensory subsystems than the olfactory system alone. So you have several chemosensory sensitive nerves in your nose. A primary one beyond the olfactory nerve is the trigeminal nerve, the fifth cranial nerve. So the trigeminal nerve has sensory endings in your nose, in your throat, and in your eye. It has 3 branches. That's why an onion has a smell and burns your eyes and burns in your throat.
Is that why?
It's trigeminal, yeah.
The tearing of cutting an onion is
trigeminal. It's a trigeminal reflex.
Amazing. We talked about trigeminal in the context of headache during a headache episode.
It's a trigeminal reflex. So the lemon you were smelling may have been a trigeminal sensation.
So smelling the lemon with my eyes is what you're saying.
Well, no, with your nose,
but
with your trigeminal receptors and not your olfactory receptors. So within olfaction researcher jargon, there's what we refer to as pure olfactants. These are odors that will stimulate your olfactory nerve alone. They won't influence your trigeminal nerve at all. And an example, just to get a sense of what that might be, would be the coffee right here is a pure olfactant. Vanilla is a known pure olfactant. These things have no trigeminal activation.
But as long as we're on this topic, and we'll weave back and forth, but I'm glad we are on this topic because a tremendous number of people wrote to me during the pandemic and continue to about olfactory loss. I've heard of this olfactory training whereby if you have a partial or even complete loss of primary olfaction,
right,
that one is encouraged to smell a number of different smells. I grew up studying activity-dependent wiring of the nervous system. It makes total sense to me why keeping neurons active keeps them alive. So this is not fire together, wire together type thing. By the way, that's a quote from Carla Schatz, not Donald Head, folks, or me. But this is about keeping neurons electrically active, in this case olfactory neurons, in order to maintain their connections, because otherwise they will die.
Olfaction is a definite use it or lose it system. And so that makes total sense. And indeed, there's very strong evidence for success of the training programs, more than the alpha-lipoic acid.
Great to know.
And so that's a real thing. And what's cool about that is that you don't need to go out and buy expensive things, although you can. Of course, there are people who are capitalizing on this commercially already, but you can just take things from your refrigerator or your makeup cabinet or whatever and smell them, attentionally and constantly and sniff them, and that exposure will help you recover. There is good data on that by now. You made that point in passing about regeneration in the olfactory system. Indeed, one of the cool things. So in olfaction, you can study many things through olfaction. And indeed, one of them is neuroregeneration, because the olfactory neurons are really the only neurons that do that systematically in the adult mammalian brain. And whether the human olfactory system shows the same level of regeneration as it does in other mammals is and was somewhat questionable. And I'm just bringing that up to share a really cool study that was published in Neuron, I think somewhere around 2014, where to address this question, I just really like the idea of doing that. What the authors did was look at, in postmortem, they looked at levels of C14 in adults who were exposed to atomic bomb experiments, right? So you can actually look at these neurons and time them based on exposure to radiation. And that paper suggested that there's not as much turnover in the human olfactory bulb as there is in other mammals. Other lines of data suggest otherwise. So this is kind of a debated question as to what extent of neurodegeneration you have in the human olfactory system as opposed to other mammals. But that was just a really cool paper, I think, of doing that.
Fascinating.
So should I finish the path just so we have the? So we said so information, then synapses at the olfactory bulb from the olfactory epithelium, and the pattern of that synapsing follows what's referred to as the most extreme case of convergence in the mammalian nervous system. More specifically, what happens is that all the receptors of a given subtype, and remember in humans we said we have about 350, in the mouse we have about 1,200 probably. So all the receptors of one subtype converge to one location in the bulb. And this location is referred to as a glomerulus, or in plural, glomeruli. And that may be a slight oversimplification. It's in fact two glomeruli. There's a mirror cut line. And so all the receptors of one subtype will converge to two mirror glomeruli on the olfactory bulb. So you end up having two glomeruli that reflect that one receptor subtype. And so and this is as far as, I'm giving you now the textbook view of how the system works, but then I'll happily share with you things that pose a problem for the textbook view of how things work. But the textbook view of how things work is that every such receptor subtype is responsive to a small subset of different molecular shapes, what's sometimes referred to as odotopes, the molecular aspects of the odorant. So each receptor is responsive to a different subset of odotopes, let's say 10, and each odotope will activate a different subset of receptors. So potentially you have this insane combinatorics of this potentially 350-dimensional space in the human, potentially. But then because of this convergence, you end up having on the bulb, in a way, a map reflecting receptor identity. So let's say this coffee activates receptors of type 1, 3, and 7. So the glomeruli of receptors 1, 3, and 7 will light up, quote unquote, when I smell the coffee. And if you could take a snapshot of that, theoretically, you would have the map of coffee and so on and so forth. This is sort of the textbook view of how the system works. And then information goes from the bulb to several targets in the brain. I mean, what is referred to as primary olfactory cortex is piriform cortex and entorhinal cortex. This is on the ventral surface of the brain, the lower portion of our temporal lobe. And information goes there directly, but it also goes directly to the amygdala. It probably goes directly to the hypothalamus. It may go directly to the cerebellum. It goes all over the brain. So information projects widely from there. And as far as people understand, the map that may exist on the bulb doesn't exist in the rest of the brain, and the understanding of how coding occurs in the rest of the brain is murky.
Commonly one hears that the memories that we have of odors are somehow more robust than the memories of other perceptual events in our life. I don't know if this is true or not, but people will say, for instance, I can still remember the smell of my grandmother's hands or the smell of cookies in her kitchen. At a minimum, it points to the fact that smell and memory are closely linked. And you just mentioned a direct, multi-station, but nonetheless somewhat direct path from the nostrils to the hippocampus, one of the primary encoding centers of
Two
memories in the
synapses
brain.
away.
Yeah, which is a remarkably short pathway, considering that, for instance, just by example, because some of our listeners won't be familiar with this, but some will, that sound waves that are transduced into neural signals at the level of the inner ear go through many stations before they arrive at the location in the brain where we make sense of those sound waves as voices or music, et cetera. Whereas olfaction is more of a direct route to the memory centers. Is there any just so story or real objective truth to the idea that olfactory memories are formed more easily or maintained longer or more robustly than other sorts of memories?
So yes, but first I should say that I'm not an authority on olfactory memory. It's olfactory memory is a huge field of research, and somehow our lab has never really gone much into that. Although, again, the same student I happened to talk about before, Yarai Sharoun, who's again now a faculty at Tel Aviv, ran a paper I think we published in Current Biology called "The Privileged Representation of Early Olfactory Associations." Basically, there's something about the first time you experience a smell that generates a particularly robust representation, more than other sensory stimuli. And that's what she, in fact, compared. So there's something about the first exposure to a smell in terms of the brain encoding that etches it into our being. And this is an effect that has, it has echoes, of course, in literature. I mean, the biggest cliche in this is to bring up the Proust effect, right? So the Proust effect is when he ate the Madeleine, and the taste and smell immediately reminded him of an event in his childhood where the same Madeleine appeared. But so that's something very real. There's a lot of research on it, not coming from our work. So I'm not an authority.
But it does sound like there's something special about olfaction. And that doesn't mean that there isn't something special about vision or audition. Each one has its own unique
I'm the last
tones.
to argue that there's something special about olfaction. And my students make fun of me because they say, and there's some truth to that I try to explain everything through the olfactory system. I mean, for me, everything is olfactory. So yes.
Through the lens of the nose. I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge one of our sponsors, Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens, now called AG1, is a vitamin mineral probiotic drink that covers all of your foundational nutritional needs. I've been taking Athletic Greens since 2012, so I'm delighted that they're sponsoring the podcast. The reason I started taking Athletic Greens and the reason I still take Athletic Greens once or usually twice a day is that it gets me the probiotics that I need for gut health. Our gut is very important. It's populated by gut microbiota that communicate with the brain, the immune system, and basically all the biological systems of our body to strongly impact our immediate and long-term health. And those probiotics in Athletic Greens are optimal and vital for microbiotic health. In addition, Athletic Greens contains a number of adaptogens, vitamins, and minerals that make sure that all of my foundational nutritional needs are met, and it tastes great. If you'd like to try Athletic Greens, you can go to athleticgreens.com/Huberman, and they'll give you 5 free travel packs that make it really easy to mix up Athletic Greens while you're on the road, in the car, on the plane, etc. And they'll give you a year's supply of vitamin D3K2. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Huberman to get the 5 free travel packs and the year's supply of vitamin D3K2. When I was at Berkeley, I was walking across campus one day and I saw, I think students, but I saw people on their hands and knees with goggles on, gloves on, and I think their mouths were covered too.
Everything was covered.
And they were they were crawling along the ground And I thought this was peculiar, but then again, it's UC Berkeley. And the joke is to get noticed on the UC Berkeley campus, you have to be naked and on fire, right? One or the other would not be sufficient. Please don't run this experiment, anybody. It's that kind of place. But nonetheless, a paper came out a few years later describing the results of what turned out to be your experiment that your laboratory was running, which was having people follow an odor trail with their nose. And my understanding is that people can improve their ability to track scents quite robustly, especially if we deprive them of vision and somatosensation, that is touch, and some other sensations. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that study. And I think in our audience, I'm suspecting that many people have a keen sense of smell. I have a family member who just can detect any negative, putrid odor in the environment, but also good odors exquisitely well. And I have other family members whose sense of smell is quite poor. I'd love for all of those people to learn a bit about what is possible in terms of training up or improving our ability to smell, and perhaps in the context of that study, if you will.
Yeah. So first, before even talking about improving, just off the bat, humans have a remarkable sense of smell.